What? And basically, I should maybe. It'll like relate. Oh, yeah.
Just for a minute.
Could've got-
Then bring it to
Yeah, it sounds good. If there's any sort of like feedback, or anything, I'll just mute those mics and then we'll just do it that way.
Okay.
So we won't have to worry. Yeah, this happens all the time. Don't worry. But we assist that's like over this and then friend let's just take a train and go to the wall. So we get actually
There's a couple things, little ones in our box.
yeah, how about that?
And later it's happening. Right. Like five. We got lots of shirts too. We'll be doing a shirt. Let's just hope someone. They're all larges. What happens?
Yeah.
It's a lanyard. It kind of looks like connected to
I like the smaller. Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. I ordered from
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Kirsten. I am the Regional Social Media Officer. We're going to go ahead and get our fourth session started. So what does everyone think so far about the conference? Awesome. Welcome, everybody. If it's your first conference, we're glad to have you guys. All right, so I do want to remind you guys about the PT store. It ends tomorrow, about the free shipping, and you get 20% of your sales goes to our region to help out. All right, so before we hear from our amazing speaker this morning, I'm going to invite the Eastern Shore Community College up here, and we're going to do one more drawing for door prizes.
All right. 643. 613. Well, we were rolling. 623. Okay, streak ends at 3. Going once, going twice. All right. 642. 645. 1. And this is the last one. Right. Yep. 630.
All right, there'll be more door prizes later on. All right, so once more, we are going to welcome Virginia Western Community College up here to introduce our speaker.
Good morning, everybody. Today we have Jacob Clifton. He's an Overwatch coach. Jacob Clifton, aka Spilo, started his coaching career by teaching mixed martial arts to children and adults, with a focus on training valuable life skills while learning fun hobbies. Teaching the value of character through martial arts sparked a passion for developing people through their passions. Starting Overwatch as a fun hobby, Spilo rapidly applied himself to improving at the game and almost immediately started doing free gameplay reviews. A fun hobby turned into a serious coaching during Twitch streams, which turned into coaching mid-ranked teams, which turned into a full-blown professional Overwatch team coaching career. With over 3 years of competitive team coaching experience, Spilo retired from competitive coaching and started a private coaching business and ventured deeper into content creation on platforms such as YouTube, Twitch, and even TikTok. As of now, he has built his own personal brand of Overwatch Mastery with an emphasis on the same character building principles learned from his various avenues of life. Join me in welcoming Jacob Clifton.
Appreciate the introduction. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, lovely. Okay, so I want to shout out to Laurel Ridge. I really appreciate you guys for having me. Been looking forward to this one for quite some time. So just a quick introduction, I guess, to add on to that. I think I would describe myself as the world's worst conversation starter. Because whenever, you're getting a haircut or you're introducing yourself, oh, what do you do for work? I'm always like, it's coach video games. Well, sorry, what is that? I coach video games. And the teenagers are always like, whoa, all you do all day is you play video games? And I have to ruin their day by saying, no, actually, I actually don't get a chance to play that much. And all the adults kind of look at me like, wait, what do you do? And I have to kind of explain that whole process, right? So obviously one of the strangest jobs you've probably ever heard of. But I think to me, it's more about not just what initially attracted to me to video games. I grew up playing a lot of sports. Sports was a big part of my childhood growing up, even into high school and college. But besides the competition and chasing the mastery, which is what initially attracted to me, I guess I have to ask myself, and I feel like the topic of today's discussion is really what kept me in what we call esports, what kept me in video games. I don't play the games enough. I don't have time enough. So what's keeping me in here? And I think that's kind of goes back to what really interested me the most about mixed martial arts, as I was just talking in my my introduction, where it's not just about the mastery of the art or the game, but it's about what you actually learn along the way while you're learning the game. I find Overwatch, at least in my world, to be a great analogy for competition, coaching, leadership, and just mastery of anything in general. And I also find that the people that I work with that are usually teenagers, people in college and older folks as well, is that those are the type of people that more than any other demographic need some insight on how to do that best and how to do that better, how to guide themselves to not just become better at the game, but become better at life. Now, I describe myself as a competitive person. So for me, Overwatch was this perfect microcosm, like this snow globe, if you will, of everything competitive in this perfect little environment where I could learn how to schedule myself better, learn how to teach myself to improve better, how to communicate better, how to lead better. Because obviously it wasn't just about the game for me. It was also about teaching the game and coaching a game and ultimately teaching and leading teams as well as I moved into a more competitive environment. So ultimately it taught me how to lead better. It taught me the importance of scheduling. It taught me the importance of mindset. And here's the super underrated thing, which I work at a lot more than I'd like to admit. It taught me the importance of health. It taught me the importance of silly things like sleep, not just for myself, but for people that I was working with. So when I started the game, I blame my brother-in-law. So he was like, you got to try this game. I was like, bro, I don't have time for a video game. He's like, no, this game is really fun. So I tried it and I was hooked. I was like, oh, this is super fun. And I'm a very competitive person, as I said. So I like to apply myself to whatever I'm doing. So if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. So I'm, looking up all these guides and looking up these tips and trying to structure my time schedule. And I really struggled. I had a lot of anxiety with applying myself to the competitive games. So there's certain game modes where you can lose or gain something called SR. For any of you guys who have ever played chess before competitively, you know what SR is. Essentially, it tells you how good you are at the game. And Overwatch has a very similar system. And so it was very stressful to kind of go in that environment and be like, hey, we can win or lose. And this affects, for no better analogy, it affects my record, right? I'm going to lose or gain this number. And it mattered. And I think the anxiety of that and having to communicate and, oh no, and what if my settings aren't right? Or what if I make a mistake and my teammates might get upset at me or the enemy team might think I'm messing up or throwing the game. And I learned how to just be able to learn to shut out the noise and apply myself. I learned how to set goals for myself. I learned how to do something that we call in the scene called VOD review, where you go back, you record your gameplay, you record the footage, just like an NFL coach with film. And you go back and you go, hey, these are the mistakes that I was making. These are the things that I need to improve on next time. All right, let's go into practice next time. And let's actually apply those things. Except in Overwatch, there aren't really any drills that you can run besides just playing the game again. So ultimately, the competitive games were the drills. And that was stressful in of itself as well. So along the line, I started in the absolute lowest gutter tier. We talk about basically Little League for Overwatch is where I started. And I worked my way up all the way up to the highest rank. And along the way, I learned how to structure my time better. I learned that around an hour and a half to 2 hours of training around every day with a specific set structure, with specific goals. I have so many sticky notes on my desk with little notes of things to work on and notes of improvement. So many details. I actually got coaching. And along the way, I'm with my coaching mindset, because that was something that I've always loved doing. I'm not only learning how to learn, but I'm thinking, okay, I need to remember that because if I coach somebody else, that's what worked for me. And so eventually I got the highest rank and I quit. I quit the game. I quit playing the game. And then I immediately devoted everything that I'd learned to coaching and teaching others because, as I said, I just loved competition. So I started off with coaching lower ranked players that were, garbage like I was and helping them walk through the same mistakes, the same pitfalls, the same stress and playing too much or not playing enough and avoiding things and trying to always find the solutions. And really the solution was always very simple. And then ultimately I moved on to the pro leagues, which I was as surprised as you are that was actually a thing. I didn't realize that was an actual thing. And it is. There's teams. There was the Overwatch League. There was Overwatch contenders and tournaments for millions of dollars. And unfortunately, I never quite made it that far. But regardless, it was remarkable how crazy these guys were at the game, phenomenally skilled. And yet so many people at that level really didn't know the nature of competition. And I think that's something that's probably not unique to Overwatch and esports. I think if I was working with any of these collegiate teams in any other sport, I would realize that a lot of these kids coming out of high school, they might have the mechanical or the physical skills to be really good at their sport, but applying themselves in the competitive environment under the microscope with media pressure, with people on Twitter, Reddit, and other forms of social media, you know, giving them a hard time, making fun of them, poking fun. We have all read, you know, the social media after a close loss, right, for our favorite sports team. And, you know, the kids, they don't know how to handle that. They don't know how to do that. They don't know how to apply themselves in structure. They don't know how to communicate and work together as a team. And I will say that while the stereotype is not completely true, you know, gamers are definitely not the most, let's say they're a little bit degenerate in some aspects. So they have a lot more to learn in some aspects. So I think what I realized is when I got with the pros is obviously there's a lot of competitive and advanced strategy, but I spent a lot more time than I realized I would on teaching life skills. Yo, get to sleep, man, right? To use their vernacular, right? You got to go to sleep. You know, you got to communicate. You've got a problem with this person. Hey, let's meet. Let's talk this out. Like we need to be able to communicate your problems without getting upset, without getting angry. And so many of my teams would win or lose off of those intangibles, off of those life skills, off of those people skills, off of their ability to communicate clearly and to keep calm, the ability to not choke under pressure. That's an unbelievable skill. And I spent a lot of time working with the players on how to develop those skills. And what I realized is because I never really been a big video game kid growing up. I know my parents always wanted me to apply myself to more productive things. So when I get into the video games, I knew that was something that was very sensitive to me, is that for a lot of people, video games can be more of an escape. It can be more of a trap, and it can definitely attract a demographic that may not apply themselves as well. So for me, it's like, I don't just want this to be about winning games. I want you to, even if we lose every game this season, which hopefully we won't, what are you going to walk away from with this? Let's not waste our time while we're here. Let's develop those skills. Let's develop those scheduling, this mentality, this even physical health, as we were talking earlier. And because that's what had given, what I had taken from the game, I wanted to make sure that they took that as well. And what I realized with my time in esports is that people don't really always know how to lead. People don't really know how to get good at things. Most of the players that got to that level really just mindlessly applied them for ungodly amounts of hours on the game daily and kind of just fell into success, right? But they didn't really know what to do with that time. They didn't know how to really use that time efficient. People don't really know how to apply themselves, at least at that level and at that age. So for me, it was a way to teach life while teaching the game. Mastering Overwatch, the competitive level or the not competitive level, it simply became the way I taught the analogy of life to people who otherwise wouldn't be interested. And I really think it's a darn good one, because whether it's the team aspect, whether it's the competitive aspect, whether it's applying yourself and focusing in scrimmages and VOD reviews, whether it's communicating with your teammate, whether it's getting good sleep, whether it's even just the simple idea of, one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is trying to not just let me teach you exactly how to play the game. I might give you a very fundamental structure, but one of the key aspects of successful leadership is inspiring leadership in the people that you're coaching and having them take ownership. So one of the big things that I always pushed is having each individual player apply themselves and coming up with their own ideas to their own solutions. Because the way Overwatch works is I can't really call plays from the sidelines. I can't really tell us, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. Okay, no, stop, adjust here. It's really, hey, we start the round 15, 20, 25, even sometimes 30 minutes later. I'm not allowed to talk, right? They're basically figuring out the strategy on their own. So if they're not able to figure that out on their own and figure things out on the fly, that takes a level of not only improvisation, but a level of effort that a lot of those players just didn't have. And so what I would do is we'd spend time, we'd be like, all right, guys, we're going to have a review tomorrow. We're going to study some film for about 30, 45 minutes. I've got this round, that round, this round. We have some footage from yesterday. And I would assign homework for players to apply themselves in studying. They come up with notes. And it was funny because whenever they would come up with the idea or they would come up with the strategy from their study, they remembered it a lot better than if I had taught them, because that was their idea. It was their strategy. So even little skills like that. So after moving on from competitive Overwatch, I think I kind of entered the more casual scene again. Life is a big circle, I think. And as I'm coaching just average players that just want to get better, they're not exactly going for the top tier leagues. I realized that, again, it's the same things. So many people struggle to improve because they get very frustrated at their lack of improvement, or they don't set goals, or they don't get enough sleep, or maybe they overcomplicate things, or they doubt themselves, or they play too much, or there's no consistency. And I think the irony here is I've actually coached more people into quitting the game than I've coached them to the top level, because so many times in our sessions we have these conversations about, like, why aren't you improving? It's almost like lying down on a couch, like sitting up there looking at the ceiling. Well, actually, and I'm like, well, why aren't you doing this? Or what is your mentality about that? And often along the ways, people will go, well, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me, or maybe I'm actually not that interested, or they learn to apply themselves really well. And through the skills that they've learned to apply to Overwatch, they learn how to apply to other things in life that may be more interested in. They go, hey, thank you for, teaching me life skills about this. I'm actually now applying that to this sport, or, I'm working on this. I actually have one of my students is actually writing a book now. I quit Overwatch to write a book. And those are always the best success stories to me. So what do you do with all of this information? And I think for me, I've learned really 4 principles that are more important than anything else. And this is through more hours than I'd care to admit. Number 1, and this applies to anything, no matter what it is, no matter how silly or flippant it is, apply yourself to whatever you do. Success or fail, you need to expand your range. I think it's very easy for us to get in the mindset of whether it's a job, or whether it's a hobby, or even just a silly skill. If I don't succeed, in whatever success really means, if I don't succeed, I wasted my time. And what I learned with this is that applying yourself with good effort and really being self-aware and applying yourself over and over and over again, you learn things along the way, whether you succeed or fail. I never won a championship, but in the effort to win a championship in the Overwatch League, I learned so many skills about how to teach, lead, communicate, and I learned more about myself along the way. And I think that's the most important thing. You expand your range of what you understand. That's number 1. So apply yourself whatever you do. Number 2, don't let perfect get in the way of good. And this is just as much a lesson for me as it was for the people that I was coaching, because I would work with people that would get 4 or 5 hours of sleep, or they would be terrible attitudes, or they would be very lazy, or they would play way too much, or they wouldn't set any goals. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to work with this? This is a disaster, right? And it was very tempting there to be like, all right, this is the rule. This is what we need to do. You're going to sleep this much. You're going to give me no more attitude and this and that. And even with the casual players, okay, this is how much you're playing, or this is what you're doing. Okay, you need to stop everything you're doing and do it perfectly. And unfortunately, I think we in life need to do that all the time, whether it's like a weight loss goal, or, I'm going to spend more time with my kids, or I'm going to spend more time with my parents. And what we do is we set the bar so high that we then never reach it, or we'll reach it for a week, right? It's like the February, the gym, you go to the gym in February and it's a ghost town. You go to the gym in January, the New Year's resolutions, and it's packed. And I think people set the bar too high. They don't hit the bar, and then they get discouraged, negative reinforcement, and then they don't want to do it anymore. So for me, it's like, don't let perfect get in the way of good. Set the bar just a little bit higher than where you're at. Build that habit, build the skill. It won't become effortful anymore. You'll just do it. It's effortless, right? And then you can move the bar a little higher, a little higher. And I think that was important for me, is whether I was teaching or working on myself, is just to be better every week or every month than I was before, even if it's just by 1%. A 1% increment applied exponentially goes a long way. Number 3, build confidence through your learning process, not just your execution. Don't let your ego get in the way. I think one of the things that I developed is that I had a little bit of an ego, because I knew even if I stunk right now, if I was garbage at the game or whatever skill, leadership coaching right now, that I trusted my learning process and my effort, that even if I was bad right now, that I would be good later. A lot of people develop an ego that I'm really good right now. And I think that's where ego is dangerous, because ego says where you're at right now is perfect. That was not my ego. That was not anything I tried to work with my players. I knew I wasn't very good right now, but I trusted my process, so that even after mistake, that through that process, I would actually make myself to be what I wanted to be. It's trusting the process that eventually I will be where I need to be. And that takes a lot of losing. I remember early on in my competitive coaching career, I made a lot of really silly mistakes, not just in terms of strategy, but in even like people management skills. I gambled on a lot of things. I was too nice. I was a little too hard. I communicated too much. I communicated too little. I communicated the wrong ways. And I would, I'd read a book and I'd get an idea. I'm like, okay, this is it. This is definitely applies to my team. I'd go out and try it, fail miserably. I'd read another leadership or communication. All right, this is definitely the skill that I need to just fail miserably. But along the way, I figured out what worked. And that meant that I looked stupid many times. But in the end, I was able to figure out and develop a lot more than other coaches who were my peers, because I was willing to push the limits more and willing to not gamble so much as just be willing to make mistakes in the long run. Build confidence through your process. Have ego in your process, not ego where you are right now. Number 4, aim to impact people positively, whatever your niche is. And this is, I think, maybe the most important one where, again, going back to my starter, right? What do you do for work? Video games, right? Kind of. But I have learned that what I have done the last 4.5 years, I have so much more confidence about my positive impact through that than I have in any of the time prior to that. And that's not saying that, I've changed lives. Not necessarily, no. It's just that I felt like I had more of an opportunity than I thought that I would to help people to do the right thing and grow and improve as people, because I underestimated. I just didn't think it was possible. I'm coaching video games. There isn't really that much, but it doesn't really matter what you do. I think is what I learned. There's always an opportunity to help people, to educate people, to educate yourself, and just to be a general encouragement to other people. I think back to all the time that I wasted in high school. I taught gymnastics and I tutored a lot of algebra and calculus. And there was time I did a lot of manual labor. And, I look back and I'm like, I wasn't learning really great skills while doing those jobs. But actually, because I applied myself really hard to those jobs, even if they felt like they were going nowhere and it was really boring and whatever, I was like, get something out of this, get something out of everything that you do. I learned improvisational skills through gymnastics. With the kids, we taught a kids gymnastics summer camp, right? And it really wasn't well structured by the guy running it. So there was a lot of hours where there was nothing to do. And so I just had to make up stories and skits. And usually the kids would tell me what I had to do. And kids are little boogers, man. And I'd always involve me hurting myself and they would just die laughing. I thought that was hilarious, So, I learned how to do little things like that. Even when I was working for a tree service, doing a lot of manual labor for a long time, I spent a lot of time thinking. Came up with some of my best ideas doing that job. And I think that's the thing that I learned more than anything else. Don't just show up, work, apply yourself, whatever you do, and impact people positively and learn skills along that way. I learned small skills, whether it was the martial arts, the gymnastics or whatever, that I really, truly gave me an edge over my competition in Overwatch coaching, because I knew so many coaches that would spend 10, 11 hours a day studying footage over and over and over and over again. And while I definitely did my share of that, where I was successful was some of the people skills, the communicational skills, the leadership skills, my ability to just sit and think in the shower and think about what I needed to do differently. And that was so much of that time was spent more efficiently because of those things that I developed through other times. So I guess more than anything, apply yourself. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Build confidence through your process and aim to impact people positively. You can have a positive impact no matter what you do, no matter where you go. And I think that's the most important thing. So I think this is the Q&A time, if I'm correct.
Whoever has a question, go to the podium to ask, make sure you can hear. Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, did you say you also do like social media coaching and things like that?
Repeat the question one more time.
Did you're like words say that you also do like social media stuff?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell us just a bit more about that, or like what your process with that is and how it maybe differs from the coaching or anything?
Sure. So you said when dealing with social media or coaching people on social media?
Coaching people on social media.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So I think when it comes to a lot of like the Twitch streaming and the YouTube videos and things like that, a lot of it is it's difficult because you essentially have to boil down what you're trying to communicate to I guess, appeal or speak to the biggest demographic that you can, because when you're working with somebody one-on-one, you get a read of how they better communicate or how they listen or how they learn, and try to kind of tailor how you coach to whatever works better for them, which can be hard to do. But when you're coaching to, an infinite number of people potentially, you really have to boil it down to the simplest thing that's going to affect and educate the biggest majority. So for me, it's been about, even in my social media, right? We talk about the importance of sleep. I can't necessarily boil it down to, hey, you need to get more sleep, but I have to actually convince somebody who might not be interested about why sleep is important. And the same thing applies to whether it's an Overwatch strategy thing, or if it's like I said, a life skill, a communicational skill. When it comes to coaching social media, because a lot of times you don't necessarily have that person convinced because you're not talking with them one-on-one, and because you don't really know what's going to communicate to them better, you generally have to go very broad, very specific, and you really have to try to convince them that what you're saying is applicable to them, because it usually is. It's a weird one. You get some ugly comments too, but that's part of the nature. You shoot when you're communicating to that big of an audience. It is what it is.
All right, first off, I would like to thank you for coming and speaking with us today. We
Sure.
really appreciate it. And second of all, our honors topic is the art and science of play.
Yes.
So my question is, when you are kind of in a field that is considered play, how do you blow off steam and play to sort of break that up? So what's your outlet?
That's a great question. Like I said earlier, I am the least video game coach there is. I find that when I am applying myself to Overwatch and coaching and teaching and making content and editing and thinking, the last thing I want to do when I'm done is play Overwatch usually. So what I actually do is I do a lot of board games with my wife. I read a lot of books. I actually compete in travel flag football all along the Eastern Seaboard. We do a lot of tournaments. I do lift weights, take walks, a lot of walks. Back when I was competitive coaching, I would joke with my wife because, you had a long day of scrimmages and some problems and you're all stressed up. And she would say, oh, we're going to go for a rant walk. And I'm like, yep, we're going to go for a rant walk, And so we'd walk the neighborhood and I've just got to get all the blow off the steam off my chest. But for me, I think it's definitely I think one of the things they say about is avoid making your play your work. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but it's definitely what kept me in Overwatch is really not been the game. It's been definitely the coaching and the competitive side of thing and helping other people. Because when it comes to leisure, it's not Overwatch. It's usually taking a walk, reading a book, or doing something else.
So I have a kind of fun question.
Oh boy.
So pre-Overwatch, what was your favorite video game?
Pre-Overwatch. Think about that. All right. So I got a spicy take here. All right. You guys are going to love this one. So didn't play much video games as a kid growing up, but my dad grew up in the Atari phase back in the early 1980s. And he got an Atari when he was 14, 15 years old. It was the thing, right? So my dad still had his Atari when I was growing up as a kid. And so occasionally he'd pull it out and we'd have the wires you'd have to plug into the TV and the little joystick controllers. And we'd play Space Invaders. And there was a baseball game. And I can feel my blood pressure rising every single time because I think I beat him once out of maybe 190 times. I don't even know. And there was all those old Pac-Man. My dad was ridiculously good at Pac-Man. There's a game called Dig Dug that I love to play. So a lot of those old 1980s, I guess really mostly just the 1980s arcade games were that was what I grew up playing occasionally with my dad and repeatedly losing to my dad. So that was where a lot of the fun came from.
Hey, I was curious, what martial art did you used to teach, and do you still practice that? And then my second question is that when were you able to say like, okay, I'm like starting to become financially free, and like this is my job, and I'm an Overwatch coach? Like, when was that? Like, when did that realization come?
Sure, sure. Great questions. So the first thing is I worked with a very specific mixed martial arts studio, which is really kind of hit or miss because unlike a lot of the other martial arts like jujitsu and judo and taekwondo, it's not exactly certified. But my instructor had started off as a full-time karate instructor and had basically dabbled in boxing and had started to train jujitsu for several years. So what we had is we developed a mixture of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, boxing, and Muay Thai. And that's essentially where a little bit of wrestling as well. So we really were, I wouldn't say far from pioneers, but we were really the first school to my knowledge in New Hampshire at the time to teach essentially what we described as real self-defense mixed martial arts to children. And so along the way, I spent a lot of time working with Nogi, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, and a lot of things like that. So I really enjoyed that because I remember actually what got me into martial arts is my wife taught it. When she told me she had done martial arts, I'd been like, oh, that stuff is like the 1980s action movies. That stuff doesn't really work. And I watched, what the Jiu-Jitsu and the Muay Thai that they were doing. And I'm like, oh, that's what they do in the MMA fights. And it turns out it's pretty darn good. So I got into that and trained for a while and then taught for several years, ran my own school at a little town called Center Harbor. And that was a lot of fun. And so, no, I train a little bit now. I don't teach anymore though. She still teaches though, actually a little bit. So she had started she has this thing where she's always got to be helping kids, right? She and I have always grown up loving working with kids. So she actually has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school right down the street where she's teaching some kids classes down there. And then in terms of self-sufficiency with video game coaching, hard, very difficult. I spent for about the last year and a half where I was coaching martial arts. I was coaching an Australian team. Don't recommend it. Got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I would coach until 10:30 in the morning. And then I'd go to sleep for 3 or 4 hours. I'd get up around 1 or 2. I'd go teach martial arts all afternoon, all evening, come back, sleep for 2 or 3 hours, get up, rinse and repeat. And that's kind of how I was self-sufficient. It wasn't fun. It didn't pay very much. And even when I was in the league, which was the highest level of competition, essentially you would have made almost as much as I would have working minimum wage, really. It's essentially like it's a very popular thing, but unfortunately, and I think the esports model, I mean, I don't want to get on this conversation, the esports model across the board, whether it's Overwatch or not, is struggling in terms of finding where the return on investment is. There are, especially during COVID, there weren't a lot of in-person events. So a lot of the income for a lot of these video game orgs was really struggling. Now, what I'm doing right now, ironically, the transition into the content and the YouTube and the private coaching, definitely some growing pains for sure. But it's actually, if you apply yourself, it's a little bit more profitable. There's definitely a higher ceiling with it because you can leverage the Twitch streams, the YouTube, and the private coaching model a lot more because there's a lot more return on investment in that field. But it's stressful. You definitely pay what I call the passion tax, right? Where like, if I have a bachelor's in finance and I was almost this close to, I had an internship with Edwin Jones that I decided to work with the martial arts instead because I had really, really great time doing it. But, sometimes I look back at what I would have made with the bachelor's in finance. I'm like, yep, paying the passion tax. But ultimately the impact there is like something I would never trade.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, the pressure's on now. This better be a good one.
Hi.
Hi.
So I was just curious, if there was a particular role like DPS or healing that you found both that you enjoyed more and then also that you found harder to coach people at.
That's a good one. Here's an interesting one. So I would say the support role, which is, healing your teammates and then also taking action yourself, was probably the role that I enjoyed the most. I like the dynamic of play there. But I actually think that's also the hardest one to coach in some aspects, because one of the traps that a lot of people fall into that play that role is they will heal and heal and heal, but they don't know to take ownership and to take action themselves, to defend themselves and to apply pressure. I know I'm probably speaking a foreign language to some of the people in the room. You guys gonna have to deal with it. So I think that was a tricky one to coach, because you needed people that were very much passive. Hey, you got to be a little bit proactive occasionally here. And that was sometimes that psychological flip was something that was a little bit harder for people. And interestingly enough, if you want to tie that back into our talk earlier, I found a lot of the way that people played the game, 95% of the time would mirror how they lived their life, whether it was passive or proactive or, ego or going in first. And so what would often happen is that it was a kind of a cool moment where I'd work with some support players that were too passive, didn't take action, didn't take ownership, just kind of like, oh, I'm going to help, and I'm too scared to take ownership. By encouraging them to apply themselves more directly and have a little bit more confidence in the game, it often translated a little bit outside the game, which was kind of cool. That was definitely one of a fun moment. So, well, is that the last question? All right. Well, I appreciate you guys so much for having me here. I had a lovely time. Hope everything is going well over at Laurel Ridge. Looks like everything is going well. Definitely a fun discussion. Is the art and science of play. That's a cool topic. Appreciate you guys for having me here. All right, y'all have a good rest of your morning.
We're so grateful and honored to have you speak today. And not only did you talk about play, but you also inspired us all to play. Which is always a good thing. And our groups are going to have plenty to discuss in their breakout sessions. So thank you. Another round of applause.
Thank you guys so much for having me here. Have a good rest of your morning and your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.